As we look forward, we have a debt problem because you can't keep adding to debt faster than you add to income without that problem. And that's a big risk. You have a change of 50, 25 basis points and so on. Let's just go back to the basics and the big picture. First of all, let's take the bond yield. The bond yield, roughly speaking, has got to be about what we determine the expected inflation rate will be over the period of time. Of course, there's a question about that. That number, it probably is settling into the vicinity of 3.5%. That's the right number. There has to be above that a real interest rate. In other words, for those who are holding debt assets, they have to receive a return above the inflation rate by something probably in the vicinity of 1.5%, 2%. So that is going to get you in the vicinity of 4.5%, 5% interest rates. And you're seeing the movement around that level. Then there's the big question of the supply demand for bonds. The government produces a certain amount of bonds that are in line in size that is equivalent of roughly the size of the deficit. That means they're going to have to sell a lot of bonds. And then we look at who are the buyers of those bonds and do they have an adequate appetite? And that's a big risk because many who own those bonds have had losses in that. That's not just banks, that is central banks, that is Japanese investors and so on. And so there's a supply-demand issue. You'll have these wiggles around there, but those are the fundamentals that will drive it. So we're seeing the need for the rise in real interest rates so that the creditor gets an adequate return at the same time as we have a supply-demand balance. So that's how it looks to me. What's happening in the economy is that a lot of money was sent out in the form of checks and the like, and went out to a lot of people. And so the household sector did well because the government sector did poorly. They got themselves in deeper debt intentionally so that the household sector and the business sector could be better off. And then there's the rise in interest rates. What happens from that is that savings of money gradually goes down, and also the debt maturities as they roll forward gradually go up and create a squeeze. So there's an emerging squeeze happening. However, because the unemployment rate is relatively low, and because the compensation levels have been relatively high because of that set of circumstances, the household sector's income has been good. So you have a sector in the household sector, hence the economy as a whole, and I'll include the business sector in that, in which by and large the financial transfer of wealth from the government as it got in debt and gave it to the public sector, gave it to the private sector, that allowed that to happen. That is the formula for a gradually weakening economy, not a big break in the economy, a slowing of that economy. I think that's what we're seeing. And as a result of that, that's what you're seeing in the bond market as there's a bit of a easing within that range. As far as the question of where the rates are, most likely, I think the rate structure is going to be staying at its level, perhaps slightly less, but there's a range of uncertainty around that having to do with the supply-demand question. We're now at a period of time where the supply of bonds to be sold will start hitting the market. And now we have to see the demand issues of that, and that'll be around there. I think that probably, I would say somewhere in the vicinity of relatively flat. I don't think there's going to be any important change in the Fed policy other than maybe a slight easing as the economy slows down. I think the thing to realize is that the economy will likely weaken. In other words, its growth rate going to something close to zero, plus or minus, maybe 1%. And with that exerts a slight downward pressure on interest rates. At the same time, the supply issue becomes an important issue. I think we're talking about the short term as very distinct from the longer term. The short term we just talked about. The longer term is that we are at a point in which we are borrowing money to pay debt service. And there is a process by which when you keep having debt growth faster than income growth, then that means that you have debt service encroaching on your spending. That's the same for the government as it is for us. And as that happens, and you want to keep spending at the same level, there is the need to get more and more into debt. And the way that works, it accelerates. We are at the point of that acceleration, which creates the supply-demand problem. And it's made worse by the other issues that we're talking about. The internal political issue, the internal social conflict issue there is something that is affecting foreign demand for bonds. About 40% of our debt is sold to foreigners. And so there is a concern of the American politics, of the controlling of this debt crisis, and these types of things. So we come back to the same basic question. How strong are we going to be? When we talk about strong, what I mean is also economically strong. And economically strong means financially strong. That means it's just a basic thing. Financially strong means, do you earn more than you spend? Do you have a good income statement as a country? Do we have a good income statement? And do we have a good balance sheet? More assets than we have liabilities. The worse that gets, the more we are going to have that long-term problem. And it's just, you can see it in the numbers. It's just a matter of numbers. We are near that inflection point.
When I hear people coming up to me and say, oh, the price of real estate going up and they're jumping in to buy real estate right now, I don't say anything. And the reason is that people are just getting into the hype. All this credit, it's actually debt, credit and debt, pumping into this economy, trying to prevent this crash. And if inflation keeps going, I get richer. I am extremely happy. And I think Biden, I'm not Republican or Democrat, he intentionally wants inflation. That's why he shut down the XL pipeline. That's why he stopped drilling to get oil prices up. When oil prices go up, all these truckers in Ottawa screaming, they can't get food to the table and all this, prices of food go up. Inflation keeps going up regardless of what's going on, just because the policies shutting down the XL pipeline, stopping drilling of oil, so the price of oil goes up. I watch all this, and meanwhile, these people are jumping out and buying real estate like there's no tomorrow, and I can't even talk to them. We're on a turning point. But please understand, ladies and gentlemen, inflation makes the rich extremely rich. The middle class will pay higher taxes, and the poor will get poor because they're the ones who can't afford that $25 Wagyu steak that my friends are selling. So that's why we're in the biggest critical turning points, and that's why I don't know how many years ago when I walked past Richard's book and Borders, and it says a dollar crisis. If you understand what's going on, the problem is the U.S. dollar. Because in 1944, it stopped being money. It just became the reserve currency of the world. And in 71, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. We're being set up right now, one of the biggest changes in world history. And it's, oh, I bought a property. What do you think? I can't even talk to him. Because this, to me, is 2007 all over again. And then the repo market collapsed. 2008, the market collapsed, and back in 2008, this guy named Bernanke, I believe it was, could print money. And this is where we are today. You've got to wake up, ladies and gentlemen, because otherwise you're just this stupid little hog just driving to slaughter. So America is we're at, not just America, we're one of the biggest turning points in world history. And like, there was Rockefeller, one of those guys said is, when shoe shine boys are giving you stock tips, time to get out. And I was in Safeway the other night, and these people are coming up to me, I did what you said, I did what you said, I bought a rental property, I bought a rental property. And I came back home and I said to Kim, time to sell. It is so dangerous, but you can't talk somebody out of it because they drank the Kool-Aid. So that's why I'm really honored to have a dear friend, Richard Duncan, been friends for years. He helped Kim and I time the last turn back in 2008. We made fortunes because while everybody was selling, we were buying. And that time has come again. And so that's why please listen to what Richard Duncan has to say.
A few months ago, the Fed was still creating $120 billion every month. And then in November, they said they were going to start tapering that, reducing that by $15 billion a month. But the very next month in December, they said they're going to double that and reduce it by $30 billion a month. And that meant that it's going to come to a complete stop. The money printing is going to end totally early next month.
No more printing next month.
No more printing. And then the real blow came. They started letting it be known that they were planning to do the opposite. Instead of printing a lot of money through quantitative easing, they're going to start destroying a lot of money through quantitative tightening. Now, when they print money, that pushes asset prices up. When they destroy money, that tends to make asset prices fall. And in the stock market,
how do they destroy money?
Well, they destroy money because when they print money, they buy bonds with that money. And normally, when the bonds mature, they just roll them over and buy a similar kind of bond. But they destroy money by essentially selling those bonds. And when the Fed, what happens is the bonds mature and the Fed doesn't roll them over. Someone else has to buy the bond. So the Fed gets its money back. And when the Fed gets money back, that money just evaporates. The Fed doesn't need to keep any money because it can make all the money it wants anytime it wants to. So it's a bit complicated to explain in just a few sentences, but the bottom line is it's the opposite of quantitative easing. Quantitative tightening destroys money, and that tends to make stock prices fall. And we're about to get a heavy dose of quantitative tightening coming into effect within the next couple of months.
Middle America is getting destroyed in America today. It's a very different economy. Inflation isn't moving.
It will hit $5 in less than a week.
Brace for impact. High gas prices around the corner for you. America is going to be very, very upset the next few months. Jerome Powell says Fed will wait to cut rates, and that is not good for a lot of people that were hoping to get rates being cut. Oil, direct Iran-Israel war could spike oil. Ready? $30 to $40, which means if you're paying in California right now $5.50 a gallon, you'll be soon at $8 a gallon if it goes up 50%. The U.S. freight recession keeps getting deeper. The average American doesn't know what a 401k is. The Federal Reserve will not be making rate cut.
12-month core PCE inflation, which is one of the most important things we look at, is estimated to have been little changed at 2.8%, and the 3- and 6-month measures of inflation are actually above that level. So we've said at the FOMC that we'll need greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2% before it would be appropriate to ease policy.
What does that mean to the average person?
You can already see it at the gas pump because oil is 85. So the average person is like, well, I heard oil is 85. What that mean? It means the gas pump's going on. And thank goodness we're going into summer, not winter, because heating oil would be way up for people that are in the Northeast. If you bought a house maybe last year, squeezed into something at 7%, mortgage rates are still 7%. They're probably only heading back to 6 3/8 or 6.5 by the end of this year because they're talking about only cutting twice. It means the economy is not improving as much as the headlines say, that inflation is stubborn. It's still here. People are still seeing it up. And if you're thinking of buying a house and you think those interest rates are going to come crashing down this year, they're not. That's the loose translation.
Last year, a lot of people were speculating that rates are going to be lowered probably 4 to 6 times this year. And when I say a lot, I mean the heavyweights. I'm talking the guys that are the guys you go and read about, the Morgans, the Goldmans, the guys that are the experts, right? Okay, everybody's like, oh my God, it's going to go down. It's going to be great. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. And then all of a sudden, no. Another month, no, inflation's not dropping. Inflation went up 0.5 point. So now all of this is continuing the way it is to where we're at today.
When you look at all that, it's even a potential mild recession the second half of this year.
Mild recession, so they won't announce that obviously, but U.S. crude oil falls below $85 as traders discount Iran-Israel war at risk that we have. So direct Iran-Israel war could spike oil by $30 to $40. You know who says? Bank of America says. Through 2025 and Brent potentially reaching $130 and U.S. crude oil soaring to $123 if Iranian crude suppliers are disrupted by up to 1.5 million barrels per day. You have inflation, that's one thing. You have interest rates, that's one thing. You have unemployment, that's one thing. You have oil, gas prices, that's one thing.
All those first things you mentioned is like the flu. If oil moves like that, it's cancer on the economy.
Tell me why.
Because oil affects everything. Oil affects fuel, just transporting goods back and forth. And by the way, the U.S. consumer is so much in debt right now, we have a freight recession going on where the amount of freight being transported around is down. You have that. So if oil goes up, air travel goes up immediately. Energy costs, just basic energy costs for your car goes up. Plastics go up. Plastic starts in a barrel of oil. Freight goes up. Oil affects everything. It's like the bad domino to fall in an economy. And by the way, they're saying, oh, it's under 85. The peak a year ago was 93.95. So we're all the way back up within $8 of last year's peak where we were panicking and Joe Biden opened the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to take excess oil out there to kind of help the price. I mean, we're within shouting distance of this. The economy is not nearly as good as it seems. United States oil extraction need about a $60 a barrel to make a buck. 60, 65. The oil sands in North Dakota and Alberta, they need about $55. It's more expensive to get the oil out of the shale as opposed to just plugging a hole in the ground in the Gulf of Mexico or in West Texas. So United States is a very happy place if oil just sits right there at 60. So you think, well, 85 to 60 is not too much. That's 25% more. I mean, you think 25%, that's bad inflation. And if it hits on $100 or 120, that's exactly double. 65 is a happy place.
Should we expect any stability from any of this anytime soon, or is it just like, get used to the chaos?
I think we need the Middle East to calm the F down. That will settle the oil market.
Half Americans are skipping summer vacation right now due to financial challenges. 2/3 of Americans are falling behind in their bills. Jobs report came back. Unemployment, the highest it's been since 2021. The average wedding today is $30,000. When I saw that article, I said, there's no way that's the average wedding for a Middle Eastern. That's the average American wedding. You can probably save $170,000 if you marry an American versus a Middle Eastern. This doesn't apply to everybody. People are feeling stuck in their jobs. Bosses are starting to worry. What's this story all about? Companies like McKinsey, Synchrony Financial, and Exact Sciences are implementing strategies such as increased mobility budgets, job swaps, and role expansions to combat feeling of being stuck and provide new experiences for employees. McKinsey's goal is to help staffers gain a more global understanding of the world by working in different cities or countries. Voluntary turnover within companies have decreased from 17% in 2022 to 12% in 2023, leading to fewer internal moves and promotions. This has resulted in lower regrettable turnover and fewer opportunities for career advancement, causing frustrations amongst employees. Companies like Allstate are prioritizing internal recruitment by setting up career-focused conversations and creating tools to see open projects within the company. This strategy aims to fill more roles internally, with Allstate increasing its internal hires from 45% to 60%, showing that the company values employees' career progression. Tom.
This is the unintended consequence of work from home, and let me paint the picture for you. People working from home could not have those dozen conversations with your boss a week that were mentoring opportunities. Hey, look, I got this halfway done. What are your thoughts on that? Can you give me a few pointers to finish this up? All of that is off the table because you're just on a Zoom with your team to get something done. So you've turned yourself into a remote robot, not a member of a team. Now companies are coming back saying, hey, we want to develop the people inside and do internal hires to promote them. But some of these people we don't have good visibility to. Some of these people really haven't developed. And so companies right now, we've seen a lot of layoffs this year, not as much as a year ago and 2 years ago, but layoffs are coming. And what companies want is the best of the best. They're talking about, we need to expose people to the fact that, hey, there's a promotion you could get. Why don't you mentor with me a little more and aim yourself for that promotion? You're a good quality people. Companies want to keep the best, yet the work from home and everything has allowed some of the good people who made the bad choice to stay working from home, didn't get the visibility to the boss. And so now this is unintended consequences coming home to roost.
You know, the whole concept of people feeling stuck in their jobs. Do you know the average amount of jobs someone works in their lifetime? The answer is 12. So 12 different jobs. The average job is about 3 to 5 years. So you're going to plan on working for 50 years. The name of the game is figuring out where you want to be long term. You know, there's a difference between having a job versus having a profession. That's the difference between being a jack of all trades versus being a specialist. I've been at my company in the financial services world for 18 years. Most people don't spend more than 5 years at a job. They go from job to job. They're moving for a better paycheck, a better opportunity. People want a work-life balance. I want the perfect work-life balance. Well, Pat, you talk about this all the time. If you want success in your life, buddy, forget about a work-life balance. You better work. You know, the way that I operate is I like doing the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule. 80% of my life I spend working, reading, strategizing, improving. And then 20%, yeah, I'd like to enjoy life a little bit. But if you want to have success in your life, if you want to find meaning in your life, you got to work your tail off. Last point, you know, they say, should you follow the passion or should you follow the money? Well, neither. Follow what your talent is, what you're good at. If you double down at that, the money will come and you're also going to get passionate about it because you're good, because they say that competence will turn to confidence. This whole conversation about turnover and regrettable turnover and people feeling stuck. If you follow what you're good at, the rest will fall into place.
I knew this time was coming. And we as a world have never been here before. And so is it a spooky time? Damn yeah. It is probably the most dangerous time ever, 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 ever. There's nothing to compare it to because there's never been a world economy before. For example, 100 years ago, if there was a stock market crash in England, it didn't affect anybody. Now the US goes down, the world goes down. So plus with social media and all this we're doing now. And so we've never been here before. And, I'm excited about it because I make more money in crashes than I do when they go up. So, but for the average person, they'll get wiped out. I'm afraid at the worst, I hope I'm wrong, but I think we're heading for a global depression.
Global depression?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Depression. I mean, people are depressed. The economy stays down. It's hard to come back up. And now the good news is that for those who are prepared for it, like you and things like this, you'll do better. See, not everybody dies in a plane crash. Some plane crashes. But the last crash in 2008, I was on Wolf Blitzer's program,
6 months before Lehman Brothers went down, and I said Lehman was going down. And nobody listened, but it went down. And so I've been expecting this market to go down for quite a while. And I'm concerned about my fellow human beings. But as you know, most Americans are clueless. They don't know what's going on. But if you travel the world, I just got back from Africa and China and Japan and New Zealand. People are scared. Australia hasn't had a recession in 30 years, is in recession. But Americans are fat, dumb, and happy, having a good time, which is good. But I'm concerned. That's all I can say. I'd be afraid if I had kids. I think as an adult, you can go hungry, but you don't want to see your kids go hungry. And that's what's going to happen.
You think it's going to get that bad?
Yeah. And the US dollar is fake. Never in the history of the world has any fake money ever survived. And we're doing the same thing. We just keep printing this money. And when I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad almost 25 years ago, people said I didn't know what I was talking about. I said savers would be losers. Now, today, there's quantitative easing, which is counterfeiting money. And then you have zero interest rates. And people are still saving money. Are you nuts? They just printed, I think, $500 billion because the repo market is going down. And the average guy goes, well, what's the repo market? They don't know. So that's why it's fake money, fake teachers, fake assets. Our education system has been my rant forever. Why don't we teach people about money? Why is it? We all use money, but we don't teach people about it. So that's why I'm concerned. And I wrote this book, Who Stole My Pension? It's already sold out. But I wrote Who Stole My Pension because it was the reason I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The two authors here, me and myself, Edward Siddell, we both had dads who lost everything. And when I was in my 20s and my poor dad lost everything, it scarred me. And I said, I'm never going to let anybody ever do that to me. So I had just come back from Vietnam in 73. My dad was unemployed, poor dad was unemployed. And he tells me to go fly for the effing airlines. I said, are you kidding me? And he says, go back to school, get your master's and get your PhD. I said, are you kidding me? Here the guy is unemployed. He's got no pension. He's got no paycheck. And he's telling me to go back to school. I said, what, learn nothing? And those guys who, my friends who flew for United Airlines, they're broke today. Their pensions were stolen. And Americans, I wonder how my 401k is doing. I'm going, gee, I'd be a little bit worried, but they don't know.
More retirees considering to work as high inflation squeezes. A Motley Fool survey shows 44% of retired Americans are considering returning to work due to chronic inflation and inadequate Social Security benefits, which despite a 3.2% cost of living adjustment in 2024, have not kept pace with rising costs. The average monthly Social Security payment of $19.07 in 2024 is significantly less than the $48.18 monthly expense reported by Americans ages 65 and older. Let me say this one more time. The average monthly Social Security payment in 2024 is $19.07. And that is a fraction of what the average American age 65 and older reported spending in 2022, which is $4,818, okay? So with 27% relying on their sole income, inflation and high interest rates have drastically increased costs for necessities, causing severe financial pressure. Financial struggle has led 61% of respondents to report daily hardships, and many are considering retirement plans. About 25% of non-retired investors expect to return to work due to insufficient savings, while 19% doubt they will ever save enough to retire, with another 19% planning to retire later than expected due to inflation. Tom.
Words talk, numbers scream. We got a bunch of numbers here. It was very interesting. Side by side with this, Harris had a poll, and the Harris poll has been tracking. And boy, it's so surprising that mainstream media doesn't ever talk about this particular Harris tracking poll. In Q4, 79% of people said the number one issue, economic issue for them, was inflation. After saying 60% of them saying that economy was number one. And they said, what issue in the economy? 79% said inflation. In Q1, that was Q4 of last year, Q1, 82%, it's inflation. In middle of Q2, May 10th, just passed by, 84% said it was inflation. And by the way, 75% of the people over 50 in a Harris poll said inflation is continuing to increase. Meanwhile, the federal government is saying inflation's under control. No, people are saying inflation, it's affordability. And what's happening is these poor retirees and the numbers we just saw are saying, I can't do it. I got to go back. I want to be a Walmart greeter, or I got to do something because I've got a gap and it's the affordability crisis. And I previously mentioned TransUnion's food inflation survey done at the end of Q1 said it was a 30% cumulative increase since the end of Q4 2020. There you have it. There's the numbers. The affordability crisis in America is worse than ever. And now the people who can least afford it are thinking about, man, I got to go back to work. I got to get a side hustle. Grandma has to get a side hustle. Where are we?
I love Tom's commentary here. I'll flip it. Tom always says the following, there's the upstream problems and the downstream problems, right? Or this would probably be the upstream problem is a 70-year-old who has to go back to work. Sucks. Nobody wants to do that. But the reason that they're doing that is the downstream problem is they just never paid attention to saving enough money and investing. And that's the biggest problem. So what's the message that you guys can take if you're 30, 40 years old, whatever? It's nobody cares about your problems 30 years from now. When it's time for you to retire, 30 years from now when you go to retire and you're like, well, inflation in 2024, no one's going to care in 2054. They're going to say, what did you do over the last 40, 50 years of your life to get out of debt, stop being paycheck to paycheck, start saving and investing? Because I know one thing for sure, you cannot save your way to becoming a millionaire. You have to figure out a way to become an investor. And you're going to need $1 million, $2 million when you retire at 70 years old, whatever it is, so you don't end up on the government plan. So you guys at home right now, flip a coin, heads and tails. Heads, you're going to have money in retirement. Tails, you're not going to have money in retirement, because the reality is this: 50% of you are straight up going to be on the government plan. And the other 50% are like, oh shit, I don't want to have to rely on Social Security, and I don't have a pension, and I haven't saved enough money. I should probably start that 401k thing that they talk about, that Roth IRA thing. I should probably stop living for today and plan for tomorrow, because if you're 30, you're going to be 40. If you're 40, you're going to be 60. And the reality is, if you don't save that money, you're going to end up one of these old people that in 30 years has to go work.
So a couple things. We can talk what you should have done, which we have to do that because we have to learn from our parents' mistakes and what they did right, what they didn't do right. This is what happens when you don't pay attention to money, period. You're going to go through this.
Cash is a risky asset. I think so many people think if I go to cash, I'm going to be safe because it's much less volatile. But please realize, in this environment of producing a lot more cash, the real returns go down. It's a seductive asset because, let's say, relative to inflation, you might get taxed 7% a year. That's a huge amount of money over time, but it's a subtle tax. So first, watch that. Then, this is a study that I've been doing, and then I decided to share it with people because I think it's so important. A number of years ago, first with 2008, we got into a monetary situation, of course, where we're printing money, creating a lot of debt, and monetizing it. And that led me to realize that there are three big things that are going on in the world that are dominant. And then COVID came along. Those three forces are, first, the long-term debt and monetary cycle, which I mean creating a lot of debt, monetizing it, and the implications of that, which reverberate through the system in terms of all the markets and everything. The second is this conflict, this polarization, this wealth gap, and how we're at each other's throats. And I looked at the wealth gap, and I looked at a lot of measures of conflict going back in time, and I found that they were in the 1930 to 45 period. The printing of money, as I described, and debt monetization was also in the 1930 to 45 period. And the third big influence is the rise of China, so the rise of a great power, challenging an existing great power, the United States. And that has enormous implications. As an investor, I think, what are the relative appeals of the markets? It has a lot of implications. It's not just a trade war. So the markets and everything were reverberating the trade war, the technology war, the geopolitical war in Taiwan and the South China Seas, and then also the capital war. We're seeing that emerge. So those three factors required me to then go back in history. I wanted to study the rises and declines of reserve currency empires. So I needed to go back far enough that I would have a few. So I had to go back 500 years so I could see the rise and decline of the Dutch Empire and its reserve currency, the rise and decline of the British Empire and its reserve currency, the rise and beginning of decline for the United States and its reserve currency, and China. It is really concerning. It's even more concerning when I went back to find the 500 years and the times that repeated over and over again. And what I found was there's a cycle. There's a big cycle. You know, you start a new world order. In 1945, we began a world order. After the war, they decided how the world would be divided. They created the dollar as the world's reserve currency and so on.